When people talk about alliances, when they talk about the so-called unbreakable partnerships between nations, they like to use words like shared values, mutual respect, or strategic cooperation. It sounds good. It looks good on paper. And it makes people feel that there is a deeper friendship beyond the deals, beyond the money, beyond the political theater. But let me tell you something, in international relations, what looks strong is often far weaker than we imagine. What looks like a fortress can, in reality, be a house of glass. And that is exactly what we see when we look at the foundation of US-India relations. For decades, politicians stood in front of cameras and sold the idea that Washington and New Delhi were standing shoulder to shoulder against global threats, that the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy were partners in shaping a new century. And many believed it. Many wanted to believe it, because the story was inspiring. The East and the West, two great civilizations working together to shape a safer and freer world. But here's the truth beneath that story. Beneath all the glowing words and the handshakes, there were cracks. The cracks came from a simple fact. The foundation was not built on unconditional trust. It was built on convenience. It was built on a calculation that said, "You are useful to me as long as you serve my interests." And convenience is not the same as loyalty. Convenience does not survive the storms of conflict, the shocks of unexpected betrayal. It is fragile, it is temporary, and it can be shattered by a single blow. Think about it in personal terms. Imagine you have a friend who always calls you when they need something. They praise you when you're useful, but the moment you say no, the moment you have your own priorities, they turn cold. Is that friendship, or is that just opportunism? That's exactly what the US-India relationship often looked like when stripped of the glamour and the speeches. And it was only a matter of time before someone, somewhere, tested just how strong or weak that foundation really was. This is where history gets interesting, because history shows us again and again that the weakness of a structure is not revealed by the ordinary days. It is revealed by the pressure points. A bridge looks strong when no cars are on it, but put a heavy load on it and suddenly the hidden fractures are exposed. In the same way, one action, one decision, even one person, can put enough weight on the alliance to reveal whether it was truly unbreakable or just a fragile arrangement waiting to collapse. The US-India relationship, as Trump so ruthlessly pointed out, was never about equality. America saw India as a counterweight to China, a market for its goods, a partner when convenient. But the moment India asserted independence, the moment India pursued policies that didn't perfectly align with Washington's script, those hidden cracks started to show. And when Trump came along, he didn't hide it behind flowery language. He exposed it. He said openly what had been whispered in closed rooms for years, that this partnership was not built on brotherhood, but on calculation. And once that truth was out in the open, people couldn't unsee it. The world began to realize that maybe this so-called alliance was always destined to be tested by a single event or a single figure that pushed it beyond its limits. That's why we say the foundation was fragile, but because it collapsed on its own, but because it only took one spark to reveal how weak it truly was. Now, here is the deeper lesson. We often think power lies in institutions, in governments, in vast armies, or massive corporations. But in reality, the fragility of these giant structures can be exposed by something much smaller, even by the decisions of one individual. That is the psychological truth that history keeps teaching us. Empires fall not only from external wars, but from the exposure of their own inner weakness. The US-India relationship was not destroyed by decades of enmity, but by the simple revelation that its foundation was shallow, that it was built on utility, not unity. So when you look at this story, don't just see politics, don't just see trade deals or tariffs. See the bigger picture. The lesson that no alliance, no partnership, no empire can survive if it is built only on convenience. Because convenience has no loyalty, convenience has no heart. And when the pressure comes, convenience will break. And that's exactly what we are witnessing right now. Remember this, a house built on stone can withstand the storm, but a house built on sand will collapse with the first strong wind. The US-India alliance was built on sand. And now the storm has arrived. When we talk about history, people often imagine it as this massive, unstoppable force, nations colliding, armies marching, economies rising and falling. But when you really study it, you discover something fascinating. History is often moved not by the masses, but by the few. Sometimes by only one decision, one sentence, one act of courage, or one act of betrayal. That is enough to set the course of nations on a completely different path. And this is what makes the US-India relationship so powerful to study, because the unraveling of it wasn't caused by millions of people marching in the streets or by a sudden military clash. It was triggered by one individual, one Indian whose actions, choices, Or defiance lit the spark that revealed just how fragile the so-called strategic partnership truly was. Now, people will ask, how can one person make such a difference? Isn't the machinery of government too big? Isn't the weight of nations too heavy for a single individual to alter? But look at history. Alexander the Great was one man. Gandhi was one man. Steve Jobs was one man. Their influence, their decisions shifted entire worlds. Because the truth is, while institutions appear enormous, they are always vulnerable to the sharp edge of individuality. They are like a massive dam, strong on the surface. But if one stone cracks, the water pressure makes the entire wall tremble. The same happened here. This own Indian became the crack in the dam. And once that crack appeared, Trump, with his brutal honesty, poured salt into it, making sure the world saw it. He exposed that U.S.-India relations were not about unbreakable trust, but about fragile convenience. And when one Indian dared to challenge that convenience, America responded not with patience, not with dialogue, but with anger. Think about that. One individual did not just test an alliance, but revealed the psychology of power itself. Because what truly bothered America wasn't the act itself, it was the audacity of defiance. It was the refusal to bow. In Washington's mind, the partnership only worked if India played the role assigned to it. But when one Indian stood up and disrupted that script, suddenly the entire narrative collapsed. Suddenly America realized India wasn't as controllable as they thought. This moment should teach us something very important. Never underestimate the power of a single person to expose a system. Because systems are only as strong as the obedience they can command. The moment one figure refuses, the mask falls off. The US-India story is not about trade numbers or tariffs alone. It is about the psychology of dominance and submission and how one refusal can topple the illusion. And here's where it gets philosophical. Every empire in history has fallen because eventually someone somewhere stopped playing by its rules. It doesn't take an army at first. It takes one voice that refuses to be silenced, one action that refuses to bend. That's why America reacted so strongly. Not because the act was catastrophic in itself, but because it represented a deeper danger, the danger of independence. And independence is contagious. You see, when one person dares to stand up, others begin to wonder if they can too. And that is what Washington fears the most. Not just India acting independently, but the idea spreading. Because if India breaks free, then other nations will follow. If one Indian can shake the illusion, then the entire balance of power can begin to shift. That is why Trump's words mattered. He did not just criticize, he revealed. He showed the world the fragility of the empire's hold. So when we look at this story, we must not dismiss it as just one person's actions. We must see it as proof of a universal law that the individual, when aligned with conviction, can disrupt even the mightiest structures. We live in an age where people believe power only lies with governments, corporations, or billionaires. But the reality is that one person, one voice, can expose the weakness of giants. And that is exactly what happened here. Now ask yourself, what does this mean for you? What does it mean for all of us? It means that we are not powerless. It means that even in the shadow of empires, one act of courage can shift the conversation, can rewrite the script. One Indian did not just challenge America's trust. He revealed the truth behind alliances, the truth behind convenience masquerading as friendship. And in doing so, he reminded the world of something we all forget too easily. Power is fragile when it depends on submission. So never underestimate what one person can do, because one person can be the crack in the dam, the spark in the dark, the moment that changes everything. One Indian just proved it, and the world will never be the same. When Trump entered the picture, everything changed. And it wasn't because he invented something new or because he suddenly shifted U.S. policy overnight. It was because he spoke in a way no other leader dared to. He did not wrap his words in the velvet of diplomacy. He didn't hide behind the elegant phrases of strategic partnership or mutual respect. He said what every American administration before him had quietly believed, but never had the courage to admit publicly. That India was useful only as long as it served America's script. That is why his exposé mattered. Because once the mask is removed, you cannot put it back on. The world saw the truth, and more importantly, India saw the truth. For decades, New Delhi had been told that it was a partner, an equal, a respected ally. And yet, in a single speech, in a single declaration, Trump made it clear that this relationship was never about equality. It was about utility. And the moment that utility was questioned, the partnership was exposed for what it truly was: conditional, fragile, and transactional. You see, diplomacy thrives on illusion. Nations shake hands, leaders smile for the cameras, and both sides declare historic ties. But underneath, every country is asking only one question: what's in it for me? Most leaders know this but play along because the illusion is powerful. It keeps citizens hopeful. It keeps markets calm. It keeps the story alive. But Trump tore that illusion apart. He brought the raw truth out into the open, and while many found his bluntness offensive, it was also clarifying. Because once the truth is revealed, People can no longer pretend. And the truth was simple. The United States saw India as a pawn in its larger game with China, as a marketplace for American goods, and as a subordinate partner that would bend when asked. But when that own Indian defied the script, when India showed independence, Trump reacted not with respect, but with anger. He exposed the American playbook, one that had been in use for decades: praise when you comply, punish when you resist. This is the psychology of power. Empires survive not by kindness, but by conditioning. They train their partners the way a trainer conditions an athlete: reward for obedience, punishment for disobedience. And over time, those partners forget that they are supposed to be independent. They begin to think their survival depends on compliance. That is how control works. It is less about physical force, more about psychological manipulation. But when someone breaks that pattern, when someone refuses to bend, the empire panics, and Trump, in his bluntness, revealed that panic to the world. This is why his words echoed far beyond Washington. They exposed not just the cracks in U.S.-India relations, but the larger truth of how America treats its so-called allies. Suddenly, other nations could see themselves in India's position. Suddenly, they understood that their own partnerships might also be conditional, and this ripple effect was powerful. Trump, without intending to, sparked a wave of questioning. If America could speak this way to India, what does it really think of the rest of us? Now here's where the philosophical depth comes in. Illusions are comfortable, but they are also chains. They make people feel safe while keeping them trapped. Trump's exposé was brutal, but it was liberating. Because the moment the mask comes off, you can no longer live in denial. India could no longer pretend it was seen as an equal. It had to face the uncomfortable truth, and truth, while painful, is the first step toward freedom. Think about your own life. How often do we accept illusions because they feel safe? How often do we play along with stories that aren't real because the truth feels too heavy? But the reality is this: the sooner you confront the truth, the sooner you can make real choices. India, after Trump's revelation, faced exactly that moment. And so do we in our own lives every single day. So yes, Trump's playbook was cold, transactional, and ruthless, but he did the world a strange favor. He exposed what others hid. He revealed the mechanics of control. And once exposed, those mechanics lose their power. Because the first step to breaking free is recognizing the chains. And that is the lesson here. Truth may be uncomfortable, but illusion is deadly. Trump ripped away the illusion. And once the world saw the truth, it could never go back. When you strip away the speeches, the handshakes, the ceremonies, international relations come down to one thing: trust. And trust, once broken, is almost impossible to repair. But here's what most people miss. In the world of superpowers, trust is not seen as sacred. It is seen as a weapon. It is psychological. It is a tool used to dominate, to manipulate, and when necessary, to punish. The United States operates with this mindset. For Washington, trust is not about friendship, it's about control. If you align with its interests, if you follow its script, America rewards you with praise, trade deals, and military support. But if you step out of line, if you dare to show independence, suddenly that trust turns into suspicion. And suspicion becomes punishment. Tariffs, sanctions, political pressure. This is not an accident. This is the American playbook. Trump simply made that playbook obvious. He didn't pretend. He said out loud what has always been true. America rewards compliance and punishes defiance. And when that one Indian, the one individual who disrupted the illusion, stepped outside of the box, America reacted with fury. Why? Because betrayal is not tolerated in the empire's psychology. Betrayal is treated as a crime. But here's the paradox in this story. Betrayal wasn't betrayal at all. India wasn't turning against America. India was simply acting in its own interest. Yet to the U.S., independence itself felt like betrayal. That tells you everything you need to know. It tells you that this so-called partnership was never about equality. Because if it were, independence wouldn't be betrayal. It would be respected. This is where the psychological war begins. America's entire foreign policy is built on creating dependency. Make other nations believe they need you. Convince them that survival without your approval is impossible. Once dependency is established, any act of independence feels like rebellion. And rebellion must be crushed, not just to punish the one who dared, but to send a message to everyone else. Do not try this. Think about that on a personal level. How many times in your own life have you seen this pattern play out? Maybe at work, maybe in relationships. Someone in power says, "I trust you," but what they really mean is, "I trust you to obey." The moment you start thinking for yourself, suddenly that trust is broken and they turn against you. That's not trust. That's control disguised as trust. And the same principle plays out on the global stage. For India, the consequences of this psychological war were immediate. Tariffs were raised, threats were made. The narrative shifted from "India is our partner" to "India is not reliable." All because of one decision, one act of independence. That's how fragile the trust really was. And Trump, by speaking so openly, showed the world just how conditional it had always been. Now, let's go deeper. Why does betrayal sting so much for empires? Why do they react so violently to independence? Because betrayal forces them to confront the truth about themselves, that their power rests not on loyalty, but on fear. The empire cannot handle disobedience because disobedience reveals its weakness. It shows that the control was never absolute, and once one nation resists, others might follow. That is the real fear. This is why betrayal becomes a psychological war. It's not about trade numbers or treaties. It's about setting an example. America punishes not just to retaliate, but to scare others into submission. This is why India's defiance mattered so much, because it wasn't just about India. It was about the possibility of others realizing they too could stand up. But here's the inspiring part. Betrayal, once exposed, also has power. It wakes people up. It forces nations to ask themselves, are we partners or are we pawns? Are we truly respected or merely tolerated until we're no longer useful? This moment of clarity is uncomfortable, yes, but it is also liberating. Because once you recognize the game, you can choose not to play it. So the psychological war cuts both ways. America may use betrayal as a weapon to enforce control, but betrayal also exposes the fragility of that control. It reveals the empire's insecurity. And for nations like India, it opens the door to new possibilities, to redefine alliances, to seek real partnerships built on respect, not on fear. Never forget this: betrayal is not always a weakness. Sometimes it is the turning point that sets you free. America saw India's independence as betrayal. But for India, that so-called betrayal may be the very act that finally breaks the chains. And once those chains are broken, no empire can ever control you again. When one relationship breaks, it rarely ends there. In geopolitics, the world is always watching. Every ally, every rival, every neutral observer pays attention to the cracks in the system. And once America's fragile trust with India was exposed, once Trump made it clear that the partnership was not built on equality but on control, a domino effect began to unfold. Because power abhors a vacuum, and the moment one empire steps back, others rush to fill the space. Russia and China did not hesitate. They saw an opportunity and they took it. Moscow, with its long-standing ties to India, reminded New Delhi of its consistency. Unlike Washington, Russia had not imposed conditions at every turn. It had not demanded loyalty disguised as partnership. Instead, it had stood as a steady supplier of defense technology, energy, and strategic support. When America questioned India's reliability, Russia doubled down on trust. That contrast was powerful. At the same time, China, a nation often seen as India's rival, also recognized the shift. Beijing understood that the moment India was treated as an outcast by Washington, it could extend a hand even if cautiously. Trade routes, financial agreements, energy deals, China knows how to turn weakness into leverage. And so, the collapse of trust with the U.S. became an opening for both Russia and China to redefine their relationship with India. This is the global domino effect. One act of defiance, one rupture in trust, sets off a chain reaction far beyond the original conflict. It reshapes the global chessboard. And this is where the lesson becomes universal. Power is not static. It is always moving. It flows to where it is respected. The moment America exposed its conditional loyalty, India realized it had options, and the world realized America was not the only game in town. Philosophically, this is fascinating, because empires like to pretend they are indispensable. They want you to believe that without them, there is no future. They want you to think they are the center of the universe. But history proves otherwise. The British Empire once believed it was eternal. The Soviet Union believed it was unshakable. Yet both collapsed and the world moved on. Power simply shifted to others who were ready to claim it. And now we are witnessing the same principle at work. India does not exist in a vacuum. It sits at the center of Asia's economic rise, at the crossroads of global trade, surrounded by opportunities. The United States, forgetting this simple fact, was a mistake. Because when you push a partner away, when you treat independence as betrayal, you force them to look elsewhere. And what they find elsewhere might be stronger, more reliable, and more respectful than what they had before. Think of it like relationships in your own life. If someone mistreats you, if someone makes you feel disposable, eventually you stop begging for their attention. You find others who value you. And when you do, the one who lost you realizes too late that they were never as irreplaceable as they thought. That is exactly the situation America finds itself in. Now, some will say this is dangerous, that closer ties between India, Russia, and China create a new axis of power that could destabilize the world. But from India's perspective, it is not about creating enemies. It is about creating options. It is about refusing to be chained to one master. True independence means you don't put all your trust in a single partner, you diversify your alliances, and in that sense, the domino effect is not just a reaction, it is a strategy. What makes this moment historic is the timing. The global order is already in flux. America's dominance is being questioned everywhere. In Europe, in Africa, in the Middle East. Now in Asia, India's shift accelerates that questioning. It forces the world to recognize that the US is not invincible, that alliances built on control cannot last, and that new centers of power are already forming. The psychological lesson here is profound. When you mistreat people, you don't just lose their loyalty, you push them into the arms of your rivals. America forgot this, and now Russia and China are capitalizing. And for India, this is not weakness, this is leverage. By stepping into new alliances, India is not just reacting to betrayal, it is rewriting the game. So what do we learn? We learn that independence always comes at a cost, but it also creates opportunity. We learn that betrayal may close one door, but it opens many others. And we learn that in a world of shifting power, the one who adapts, the one who refuses to be controlled, is the one who survives. Remember this: when one domino falls, it doesn't just break, it sets the others in motion. America's betrayal set the first piece tumbling, and now the entire global order is shifting. The question is not whether the dominoes will fall. The question is, who will be smart enough to stand where they land? When we look back at this story, the collapse of trust, the exposure of illusions, the domino effect that shifted the global order, it is tempting to see it only as a clash of nations. America on one side, India on the other, Russia and China waiting in the wings. But to reduce it to just geopolitics would miss the deepest truth of all. Because what really changed the course of this relationship wasn't a massive army, it wasn't an economic crisis, it wasn't the collective will of millions. It was one Indian, one individual who made a choice that rattled an empire. This is the part that should shake us to our core. We are conditioned to think that individuals are powerless against the weight of institutions, that a single voice cannot move history. But again and again, history proves the opposite. Gandhi was one man, Mandela was one man, Musk, Jobs, Einstein, these were individuals who didn't wait for the crowd to move. They moved first, and the crowd followed. Nations, empires, corporations, they may look indestructible, but they are always vulnerable to the courage or even the defiance of a single human being. That is the real truth Trump exposed without even realizing it. His words, his bluntness stripped away the illusion and revealed something raw. The empire was shaken by one Indian. Think about that for a moment. If the bond between two great nations can be altered so dramatically by the decisions of one person, what does that tell you about the fragility of power itself? It tells you that power is never as stable as it looks. It tells you that behind the walls of control, there is always fear. Fear of the one who will not comply. This is not just about politics, it is about life. How many times have you been told you are too small to make a difference? How many times have you been told that's just the way things are? And yet, here is living proof that one person can change the course of nations. If one Indian can expose the cracks in an empire's alliance, what could you do in your own world? What illusions could you shatter? What systems could you disrupt simply by refusing to play along? We must understand the psychology here. Systems survive on conformity. They rely on silence, on obedience, on people believing that they are powerless. The moment one person breaks that silence, the moment one person stands apart, the system begins to tremble. Because courage is contagious, defiance is contagious, and once others see that it is possible, they start to wonder if they too can break free. That is how revolutions are born, not from the crowd moving together first, but from the courage of the few who dared to move before the crowd. India's so-called betrayal of America was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of a new one. It was a reminder that even the greatest empires can be humbled by the independence of one individual, one nation, one act of defiance, and that lesson doesn't belong only to governments, it belongs to you. Ask yourself this: where in your life have you been conforming? Where have you been playing along with illusions because they seemed safe? And what would happen if you chose to stand apart, to make a decision not based on fear, but on conviction? Yes, it would create conflict. Yes, people might accuse you of betrayal. But remember, betrayal is only what the powerful call it when you stop obeying them. In reality, it is not betrayal at all. It is freedom. That is the essence of what this story teaches us. One Indian stood apart, and in doing so, forced empires to reveal their true faces. And you, in your own life, have the same power. Don't underestimate what you can do. Don't underestimate the ripple effect of one decision, one act of courage, one refusal to conform. Because if one person can shake the foundation of nations, you can certainly shake the foundation of your own world. So let this be the final thought: never bow to the illusion that you are powerless. The chains of control are fragile, and they break the moment you stop believing in them. One Indian reminded the world of that truth. Now it is your turn to remember it in your own life.